You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
This makes my nipples hard.
Hey there, welcome to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. Our guest today, that I'm super excited about, is Dave Gilbert, an influential figure in all sides of modern adventure game development. From his early work on the Reality on the Norm series to creating the acclaimed Blackwell series and founding Wadjet Games, Dave has been active in the indie adventure game scene, guys, for over 2 decades. Sorry, I didn't mean to age it there. But he is currently working on a game called Old Skies, and I'm assuming
it's going to collapse into dust.
This is probably taking up a lot of your time now. So, hey, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that wonderful intro. I just realized, I'm like, it hasn't been 20 years, but if you count all the freeware stuff, it's been about 23 years. So, yeah, it's been a while.
Wow.
I'm glad we went with Anna's intro. My intro was a lot shorter. I was just going to say, ladies and gentlemen, the Jewish Ron Gilbert. How are we doing today?
The Jewish Ron Gilbert, yeah. That's me.
Yeah. Well, we got to use both now. That's perfect. I'm happy with that. And, you know, the first thing I have to ask you, and I'm always super curious about this question, and I imagine that our listeners are too, is why? I mean, like, when is it that you sat down at a computer game and there's an adventure game on the screen? What was that first computer game? And was that the game that made you want to do something like this? Or give me like an early progression. Like, were you
okay?
3? Were
Well,
you 5?
I guess my first like adventure game, I guess, was Infocom's Wishbringer. This dates me. I had an Apple II growing up, and so text adventures were my vice of choice, and I loved the Wishbringer game. The Infocom games. I just adored them, and the only programming I knew was BASIC, and I actually would design little text adventures in BASIC. I did a Star Trek game like every other nerd in the late '80s, but I did one of those just for fun. And I played. I borrowed a copy of King's Quest from a friend. I was really young. I mean, it was the late '80s, so I was young. But I remember walking. It was King's Quest 1, the first one, and I remember walking him around, and on a whim typing the word "jump," and he jumped, and it blew my freaking mind. I don't know why, and I think I've been chasing that high ever since. I'm like, I want another feeling like that. And then, like, you know, time went on, and I played more of them, and flash forward many years later, I was unemployed and I lived in New York. I still live in New York, but it was September. It was 2001. We all know what happened. And I was kind of looking for something to keep my mind off stuff. And I discovered AGS, and I just made a little game which starred where you played the Grim Reaper, which says a lot about my state of mind at the time. But people seemed to like it, and I started to make more. And then, I guess, 5 years later, I decided I didn't want to do anything else, and so I decided to start selling them. And 17 years later, I'm still doing that.
Oh, and it's what we needed. That was the dead time, right? That was the time where I'd go into EB Games or any of those with my dad, and if there was any adventure games, they were on a clearance rack at the back of the store. And then it was like, I was like, all these games where everybody's shooting everybody, and I said, you know, where's the girl games? At the time, that's what I called it to my dad. I mean, he played them too, but I'm like, where's the games that I want to play? So I went, and I ended up going back and playing old back catalog games, because as you know, there's no way that we played every single one of the adventure game that was released before the year 2000. So
the best place I remember was KB Toys.
Yeah.
Ooh.
They had the used game bin.
Yeah.
And it was like half of them were like in envelopes. You know, they didn't even have boxes anymore. But I got an actual Windows PC late. And so I was able to get a lot of those really cheaply because I just went into KB and I would get like, Sierra games for like $2 or $3. It was amazing.
Oh, that's amazing.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. We had a used
Didn't
store
have a
called
box
Snowden
or a
Books.
manual, but it was
Nothing.
fun.
You'd get a slash release, but you're okay with it.
Yeah,
So
I didn't care.
sticking with your childhood, what were some of your favorite like classic Lucas Sierra games growing up that really like you think possibly shaped who you'd become as like a storyteller?
Well, like I said, mostly I had an Apple II growing up. So most of it, like I said, was Infocom. And they lived and died by their characters most of the time. And or just the it's funny, I replay some of them and it just kind of amazes me how sparse a lot of the descriptions were. Well, in my head, it was just this immense, like
Right.
wonderful descriptive world. But they were really good at just creating a sense of place and just I don't know, I would just go to bed just dreaming about them and that kind of thing. But I think mostly when I sit down to write something, I'm influenced more by books and movies and things like that, not necessarily other games because I don't know. I'm just not because I just feel like if I'm copying a game's mechanic, I feel like I'm copying them.
Right.
But if I'm focused on like stories and characters and things, so I tend to be influenced elsewhere.
Right. That makes sense. We had an episode recently. We were kind of discussing like the plots of adventure games, and I think our basic conclusion was that there's a surprising lack of story in a lot of the classic games, considering it's like a narrative genre. Like
Well, a lot of the classics, especially the Sierra stuff, once you know how to get through it, it takes no time.
right.
Like a lot of the time, what increased the gameplay was the challenge of the puzzles. But once you know those, it's like King's Quest 3 could take a half hour tops to play. Even once you know all the solutions. Like even now, I replayed it. There was that 3D remake. I forget who it was by. I know Trolls Plumer was involved, but I replayed it and I was amazed. I'm like, oh wow, like this took no time to complete because I still remember the puzzle solutions all these years later.
Right. Okay, so you bring up puzzles, and one thing that we have in common, I guess the three of us really, is feeling that puzzles, their place in adventure games just maybe changed over time, and to the point where, well, just getting right to it, I had heard you say in an interview recently, I don't know how old the interview was, but I watched it the other day. It doesn't matter. You're basically just saying that you're not a big fan of puzzles, and I'm not either, and I'd rather put the story above the puzzles, and I kind of had this sneaking suspicion that that's kind of what the players want too. Like you get kind of like cool points for what it's worth on like socials, being like, oh yeah, I something intellectual about sounding about saying that you enjoy a puzzle laden game, but I think all of us are kind of over it to a degree, or just not, we don't want to get stuck in puzzles. We have 1,000 games.
You're not necessarily over it. I think the difference between puzzles now and puzzles back in the day was that Google exists. And I remember when I first played King's Quest 3, and I spent weeks or maybe a month, maybe even longer. I spent forever trying to figure out how to defeat that stupid wizard. And I mean, I was happy to do it, and I tried everything. And finally, one day, something clicked, and I figured out the solution. And it was like this amazing, satisfying feeling. But this was before Google, and back then, especially if you're a kid, your only recourse is to beg your parents for their credit cards so you can order the hint book. And or get in trouble by calling the 900 number. You got to be really, really desperate to resort to that. But now, if I was faced with a similar puzzle in a game, I would last maybe 5 minutes. You could call it shorter attention span, but that's just what would happen.
Yeah.
Like the back then, those options weren't available, so you spent a lot of time trying to figure this stuff out. But now you're only stuck if you really want to be, So I just don't think it's particularly fun. And usually, if I'm stuck in a puzzle and I do break down and Google the answer, I find myself frustrated. Either it's like oh, I should have thought of that. Why did? And I hate myself for giving in, or I think, or oh, like that was. There's no way I could have figured that out. What a stupid game, or whatever. Or it's like the story is progressing at a nice clip and things are exciting, and then they throw this obstacle, this puzzle at you, and it just drags it to a dead halt. That kind of thing. I don't think it's particularly fun. And I think what a lot of more modern developers, they understand this. And so, not that you can't have challenges or puzzle type things in the game, but they're considered more obstacles. And the emphasis has been, or the focus has kind of changed to making the actual act of solving the challenge, making that fun and responsive and interesting and that kind of thing. And I think that's the main difference, is because if someone gets frustrated, they'll leave your game and go to Google to find the solution.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, like if you have to leave my game to enjoy it, I failed.
Right.
And so I don't focus as much on puzzles. I focus on everything else.
Right. Well, one thing I've noticed that you do extremely well, the Wadjet does extremely well across the board, whether it's one of your personal games or a published one, is everything to do with environments and atmosphere and the storytelling. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I could almost summarize it that the puzzles that you tend to go with are more there to like serve the story. So it doesn't feel, this is I guess ideally as well speaking in it for any modern adventure game, but it shouldn't really feel like stop the story and start the puzzle. It more feels like a natural part of the environment, or maybe you could even say like environmental puzzles in a sense, where it just blends in with the game.
I use the word organic.
Right,
they fit naturally. Like they just are there. Like what would be a natural obstacle for this situation? And sometimes like I will just if it doesn't seem organic, or if people are frustrated by it, I'll just remove it. I don't want to get in the way of you enjoying my game, because I want to say enjoying my story, because it is, at the end of the day, an adventure game is a way of telling a story in the same way that a book or a movie or a television show or play or anything is. It's just got that interactive element that you can't get from those other things. So as long as that is in place, I think as long as you got that interactivity and responsiveness, and that's what makes the medium of a game work so well in terms of telling a story. As long as you have that, I think then you're doing your job okay.
Right. So would you say like it's like you're designing I don't know, so you're working on a room, and it's like you're not gonna lock the door on the player just to lock the door, just to cause an effect of where they have to unlock it. But I guess the same could be said in the opposite, where if you are designing a room, or you even looking at some art for a room or a piece of the story or anything, and kind of segregating it and just inspecting it, if you find something that's like, hey, this would actually be. So it's kind of like a natural problem that just happened to occur, and instead of like fixing it in the story, I could have the player deal with it as a puzzle. So.
To a degree. I mean, I do think that puzzles can often be used to like speed or slow things down. There's a moment in Unavowed that I always use as an example. It's towards the beginning, so it's not really a spoiler, where you go into a basement, and the basement is half forest. And when I first designed this room, the characters walk in, they're like, oh my God, it's half forest. But by the time the characters walk in and react, the player has already seen it for 5 seconds. So it's like you already know it's half forest. You've already processed that like long before the characters do. And so I wanted to kind of delay that discovery. So I turned the lights off, and there's like, I think there's like a broken fuse that you have to repair. It's a very simple puzzle. It's like in another room, there's a fuse that you just replace it in the fuse box, and then you turn the lights on, and then you and the characters can react at the same time to the mysterious thing that's in the basement. And I think that way is like that sense of immersion isn't lost. And like that is something that games can do really well. That whole immersion factor.
Yeah, and I can say with absolute sincerity, I remember that puzzle. So that's the best
Yay.
the best compliment I could really pay it at this point, right? Because it's been a few years, and I played quite a few games and developing my own, and I do actually remember that puzzle in that moment. So that's in that pocket. That's like exactly in the
Okay,
flow.
great.
But yeah, and it's
Good. I wasn't totally talking out of my butt there. Great.
right, exactly.
No, it's a real thing.
And it's
It's
the
a real
ideal
thing.
too. It's like because you feel this is what I would do if I was there. You know, I would try and find something to get the fuse by. Like it just all fits completely naturally. And yeah, I really like that. Okay, so I have a question for you too that just popped in my head regarding artwork because this isn't like a stage question. I'm actually just borderline panicking because I don't remember, and I'm interviewing you and I should know this. But that being
That's okay.
said, where I know obviously we're close to Ben Chandler, and one of my favorite things about all of your works is the environments and just the moody, dripping atmosphere and everything like that. But I'm wondering where you are. Did you do the art for Shiva? And where's
No.
no? Okay, so you haven't really done. I guess maybe I should back it up for people listening and just say what is your role in not your published games but your personal games?
Do the writing.
Okay.
I create all the scenarios, design, all the writing, and I do all the programming. I do all the voiceover casting and directing, and of course all of the QA, sales, marketing, basically everything but the art and the music. So yeah, I basically do most everything.
And that's one of my favorite things about your games is the one when there's a commentary, and not only is it
Yeah.
just you in various digitized forms telling me about the game as I play, but sometimes you've actually brought in the voice actors that have played roles in the games, and I get to kind of hear it from their perspective and how you work together with them, and it is so fascinating. The hardest part about playing your games is waiting till I've played them once so that I can turn the commentary on because I love
People tell me I
so
shouldn't
much.
put spoilers in the commentary. I'm like, why are you listening to the commentary before you play the game? It's like turning on the DVD, listening to the director commentary while you watch the movie for the first time. You just wouldn't do it. But I do get it because games can take a very, very long time to play. So it's like, do you want to go, could take up to 10 hours to play a typical adventure game, and that's a lot of time. So I do get it. But, I don't want to limit myself to what I can talk about. So I just
No.
always put a spoiler warning there. But thank you. I enjoy doing the commentary because when I first started selling my games, coming from a freeware background, I was trying to think of what could give it, because the Shiva was originally freeware, and then I decided to start selling it. I mean, the art, I got the art redone, so that was something that made it a little better. But I was trying to figure out ways to give it more value, because I was sort of feeling a bit of guilt because I had been doing them for free for so long, or giving them away for free for so long. I felt bad about selling them, so I got the voice acting in, and I decided, commentary, like maybe people will like that, and they did. So I get to kind of indulge and talk about myself and indulge in just total narcissism for several hours while I play, and people seem to enjoy it. So it's win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Can I selfishly ask you because I'm in development right now of a game. I'm just past the 3-year point. I am doing the art and the music myself as well, so that's why it's taken so long. But I'm wondering, like, I love so much the commentary that you do, and I really want to do it. I've already decided there's absolutely no way I can do it before I release the game. Like, it would have to be like an update. Sort of feature if I'm gonna like ever release the game, but that being said, like basically how do you, this is a fancy way of saying how do you do that, man? Like how do you
I mean, pretty much. I mean, I test the game constantly, and so sometimes I'll just, as I'm testing it, I just have my microphone all ready to go, and I come to a moment, something strikes me, I'll just hit record, and I'll just start babbling away, and then later, after I'm done testing, I'll just go and splice out the bits that I feel work. I edit myself a little bit so I sound a little smarter, and remove all my ums and ahs and stammers and things, and I just stick it into the game. So yeah, that's what I do. Also, I do it like, it's not just I do it in one go. It's like over several playthroughs, I do commentary, and every time I play through it, I think of something else. So yeah, I get it. It's it can take a long time if you're just trying to do it all at once. But I kind of do it gradually for that reason, so it's not so overwhelming.
Cool. Now I'm glad I asked, because I was imagining the opposite in a sense. I was like, well, maybe you just clear an afternoon and just, but that could be kind of sluggish.
It would take longer because you have to. I guess unless you play. I guess one way you can do it is, I know this is what others do, is as they play through it, they have like a notebook or they have a document open where they just type, oh, like here are the things I'm going to talk about, and then a lot of the folks I've worked with, they actually write out their commentary first and then read it. That's not me. I'll just speak off the cuff. That's why people say, like, why don't you like type out what you're have subtitles of the commentary. I'm like, it's impossible. It's just me stream of consciousness blathering for an hour. Like that would take forever. So right. I don't do it.
So something that I feel I have in relation with you, but I'm not sure, is like I tend to go. Maybe you can confirm for me. I feel like I go off of feel very much so. Like it's more of like a kind of flowy mindset where it's like, okay, here be a way to frame it as a question. So. If I'm writing dialogue, I need to get like into the room and into the scene and do it on the spot, not in like an ad lib sense, obviously, but more on the spot, as opposed to I have a document with the dialogue in it that I've prepared the night before, and then I sit down and it's none of that. It's more just like really going off of feel, and I hope that allows for a level of. I hope that gives room for organic things to happen. Would you say?
Well, I would say that there's no right or wrong way. If it works, then do it. I know a lot of folks have like design documents and they outlines and they plan everything in advance. They have, puzzle dependency charts and things like that. Right. I don't do any of that. And I mean, I'll have like a vague outline sometimes. Old Skies is an exception because it's time travel. It requires a bit more tight plotting than most of my stuff. Like for Unavowed, for example, or even Blackwell, I'll kind of maybe have a vague idea of what happened, and then a lot of the game is about kind of working your way into discovering how it happened. So it's like, I know what happened, so here's this environment, and here's like various things that show the aftermath of the thing that happened. How do you go about discovering it? And then I kind of figure that out as I go. And Unavowed was especially challenging because I had to do it, 5 different ways depending on the party combinations. But with Old Skies, it's time travel because I realize, instead of just discovering what happened 3 months ago, you can literally go back in time 3 months and see it yourself. Right. And like, if you're not, and I realized that's more satisfying. I want to use the gimmick. So it's so I tend to focus more on that kind of stuff. Like how would, if you had access to time travel, how would you solve this challenge or solve this mystery or something like that? Like within some, like I have some guardrails and restrictions on how time travel works. Otherwise you just go completely crazy.
Too much chaos.
With all the possibilities. There's a reason why the best time travel stories have such extreme limits, like have definite limits on them.
Right.
Because the possibilities are just, it's a get out of, any problem free card. You can go back in time and redo it or whatever. Like, or like there's a reason why Back to the Future only takes place in Hill Valley. It never goes beyond Hill Valley, and it never really expands beyond like Marty's family. It never goes beyond that because it just story-wise, it limits itself to this and never goes anywhere else, because otherwise they would just go crazy with all the possibilities.
Right.
And Old Skies, I had to do something very similar.
Right, too much to manage or too much chaos. That's interesting. Yeah, that is cathartic to hear as well, because I feel like it's very easy for me to operate within chaos. Let's say, so I'm always trying to bring order to myself to kind of like past me looking out for future me in a sense. Like and back to what you said about the puzzle dependency charts. That's straight relieving to hear, because I tried to be that person in the beginning. I'm like, well, I think this is what people say that you should do, let's say. And so I downloaded like the mind map apps and stuff like that. And I was just, sat down with all these little bubbles. I'm like, this is how people make these games, and this is how I'll do it. And just not at all. It did not.
I mean, sometimes it can work if you're having trouble laying it all out just to see the shape of it can help. But usually I'm never like, often you'll hear, oh, it needs to be this specific kind of shape. It needs to be, it needs to branch in two different directions. It needs to be relatively, there's all these rules about it, and I've never followed them just because I find it. I don't know. Again, maybe it does need to be a certain way, but I find with adventure games, there's no two people are going to get through it at the same pace.
Right.
So I don't think it matters if there's one branch of this dependency chart that you can zip through, but you might be stuck for days on the other one, or stuck for hours or whatever. So I don't know. It's whatever works, whatever gets it done. Games are impossible. I just feel like whatever, the fact that any game ever gets made is a freaking miracle. Right. Whatever gets it, getting it done is amazing just in and of itself. Yeah, so whatever gets you there.
All right, let me move on to another subject I wanted to just kind of loosely chat with you about, as opposed to hit you with questions under a heat lamp sort of thing. But it's something I've been kind of wrestling with, and I think we have on the show for possibly years, which is the matter of the best I could frame it is consequence and comfort, where there's this. Let's see. Let me try and be somewhat coherent for you. Something I like to do for our guests,
Occasionally.
Yeah, sense is hard to make. So the kind of more the old approach, I guess you could say, of making games. But then again, that might exclude LucasArts. But then again, that's me being confusing. So let me just go ahead and start over one more time, which is not in a I'm editing this way, but just in a coherency way. The more old school approach to games was using consequence such as deaths. I don't mean like Walking Deads or just bad design, but the fact of the matter is there used to be deaths in games, and there isn't anymore. And if there is, there might be like an auto save or something like that. It was kind of looking at consequences versus comfort. And to me, it's almost a way of saying Sierra and LucasArts, because Sierra was very heavy on the deaths and the consequence. And obviously the positive to consequences, is kind of those dopamine hits. You put in the work and you fail and you fail and you fail, and then you succeed and it feels amazing. But then there's comfort, which is it seems like comfort's kind of, let's say, won the day as far as where adventure games have gone. They've gone more into the route of comfort, where it's, you get kind of more of a cozy narrative sort of feeling where you get to just walk through a story and experience the atmosphere. And both of these obviously have pros and cons. And I think, I suppose the con for comfort would be that you have to create your own stakes, or to create the almost illusion of stakes, especially with adventure games where there's likely to only be one, but maybe four outcomes for the same thing, like at a stretch or an extreme example. So I'm just wondering how you feel about consequence and comfort in your own game making. Have you ever what do you think about deaths, and have you considered putting them in? What's kept you from doing them? What do you see as?
I mean, I have put deaths in my games. I think it works. I think when people say, oh yeah, they don't, it's passé to not die in a game or an adventure game. I think the issue isn't so much dying in the game. The problem with the early Sierra deaths especially was just they were terribly unfair.
Right.
And you'd walk into a room and some wizard would appear, zap you, and I'm not even talking about King's Quest 3, because that element, I think that element of danger has to be there. King's Quest 3, that element of danger needs to be there. And it's telegraphed pretty well that if you break the rules and he finds you, he is going to kill you. Right. And I think if there's no consequence, if that doesn't happen, then that sense of tension is just completely lost. Right. So that does need to be there. But when you're just wandering around the countryside and there's just some random monster that will just kill you out of nowhere, that is unfair. Yeah. And I think that often gets misconstrued as no deaths at all. There's the Indiana Jones games, he can die. Yeah. But again, it's Indiana Jones. There has to be an element of peril. Yeah. Without that, you're not playing Indiana Jones. So I have no problem with deaths in games. I think as long as there's at least an autosave or something where losing progress sucks. Yeah. Especially in a game like that where it is heavily story based. Losing a bit of progress in an action game or a platformer, it's at least you're still doing something. You're getting better at it each time you do it. With an adventure game, there's no such thing. Like, it's not really a skill you get better at. Redoing the same section of adventure game, it's not, you don't get better at, clicking the right option. You already know what to do. And so I don't think it's fair to make someone replay all of that. That's why you sometimes hear that, the puzzles get harder as the game goes along.
Right.
But again, like adventure game puzzles are not really, it's not really a skill you figure out. It's just, can you parse out all the clues and just figure out the solution? But every puzzle is different. So it's not really a skill you get better at. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But for me, I know that in Unavowed, you could die a few times. Again, it would just automatically reload. Old Skies, there's a lot of death.
Nice.
Because what I've decided to do was because time travel, use the gimmick, where the main character Fia can die, but she gets rewound.
Right.
Like, so, her handler in the future presses a button and she gets rewound by like 5 minutes or so, 10 minutes or so, with all the memories of everything that happened. So I can indulge in a little bit of kind of adventure game moon logic, because because a lot of the issues with moon logic is that you would never expect something to happen. But with this, it's like, okay, there's a puzzle, for example, there's a shootout in a bar, a guy, will shoot you. But before he arrives, you know exactly where he's going to stand. So you get a billiard ball, put it there, and he trips and falls, that kind of thing. So that's a little, like, there's no way you would know that otherwise. But because with the rewinding, you already know where he's going to stop walking, you know where he's going to walk, so you can trip him up. I find that very fun. So in that respect, like, death is necessary, which means that she dies a lot in many different ways. But it's so funny, once you allow yourself to do that, you just indulge. It's like, okay, this favorite random guy will throw a cleaver through your head. Why not? There's no consequence. Just you annoy this guy with the cleaver and he kills you with it. Okay, here we go. So you gotta, I kind of get a little self-indulgent with it.
I love what it's like a utter psychopath this conversation is making me sound like, because I'm in the background like, yes, good, yes, more death.
No. It's funny because, like, the first time I had Ben draw animate some really violent things, he took it up and beyond. There was a scene in Unavowed where I said, okay, you stab this guy with a pair of scissors. Ben is like, okay. He sends me the animation. He gets stabbed in the eye with a pair of scissors. I'm like, okay. This is what we're doing. Okay, that was all Ben.
You doing all right over there, buddy?
He'll just indulge. He's just like, how can we make this better? And frankly, how dare he? But
well, that's good news for us, because for you, there's deaths in the game, so we've kept up with that tradition. There's that sense of, there's the sense of safety from not losing everything you've done with the autosave. But that I really like the way that you phrased that, Dave. Actually,
yeah, well, because you basically you can handle the moon logic by, or basically it's not moon logic because it's baked into the plot, into the mechanics of the story and of the lore.
Yeah.
So it's like premeditated. So therefore it can't be moon logic because it's baked. And I love the idea of the handler. So it handles everything very neatly in a very, let's say, reasonable or logical way, to where as a player you can remain immersed because you can easily accept that. That's really cool.
Yeah, I like it, and also it kind of gives the main character a very lackadaisical attitude towards dying, which I find
that could be funny.
which is never not fun to write.
Right. I agree with what you said about the autosaves as well. Like when I first started development, I was like, my day's broken into day, or sorry, my game is broken into days, like many games, for Gabriel Knight, for a quick example. And I was like, I'll do one death a day, and I had this, I don't know, I was being kind of like grumpy and old fashioned. Back in my day, a death was a death, and so it's like they're gonna have to save. And I changed my mind on that. I'm like, I'm gonna autosave it because you articulated my own thoughts to me better than I ever had before a minute ago. When you you basically equated it almost to the story aspect of it. And it's like, well, having to re-go through the story, you lose immersion with the story. Arguably you lose interest in the story because you have to hear another, 10 to 30 minutes of the story all over again, and interest wanes and things like that. So the autosave really comes in in handy there. So I guess what I'm wondering now is, what about when there isn't deaths, and how do you handle the feeling of stakes? Like I think it's important in games to, I don't know, almost feel like you should pause it before you walk away. Like, even though we know nothing's going to happen, like there's something to be said about, like, the feeling that if you leave your character there all alone while you go to the bathroom, something might happen. Like, when you remove any sort of sense of stakes or that things could go wrong, I'm not saying it's immediately is a bad thing, but you do lose, an air of whether it's mystery or excitement. I'm not sure, but basically, I guess to shorten this up, how do you handle stakes when there's not a death?
Well, I mean, there's different kinds of stakes. There's emotional stakes. There's personal stakes. There's, death of somebody else. There's someone else getting in trouble. Or there's tons of ways. I mean, you watch like a rom-com. It's like no one dies. It's like the fact, but at the same time, it's like you get invested in this story and their
investment.
Romance,
Nice.
That's what it is. It's like you if you spend any time with a book or a story or even a television show, it's like you put a personal investment in something. You do want something back, or at least you're hoping that you're going to get something back.
Yeah.
And when you have something invested, it's like you stick with it, until that you reach that point where you don't think it's worth the investment anymore. So that's the case with anything. It's just like at some point, as you're creating something, you just sort of have to. You want to make that investment worthwhile, and at some point, you just have to either. You say to yourself, okay, either the audience is invested at this point or they're not.
Right.
If they're not, I've done my job badly. It's too late by this point. Like, if you're at the 3/4 mark, you're heading toward the climax, and you're still like explaining things and trying to get the audience on board, it's too late by then. If like at that point they're either on board or they're not. And I call that the having your dinner moment. Have you guys ever heard this?
No.
I've been using this phrase at every talk I ever go to, and it is yet to catch on. It is a reference. It is a reference. Have you guys watched Breaking Bad?
Yes.
No.
I have.
Okay. Well, it is a reference in the final season. There's this dinner between the three of the main characters, Walter, Skyler, and Jesse, and they're talking, and it's the most awkward conversation. And everything they say is, has 5 seasons worth of subtext. And if you watch that scene cold, you will have no idea what's going on. But the writer, Vince Gilligan, he wrote the scene, just accept, like, he kind of had the whatchamacallit, the confidence to realize that, okay, the audience is on board at this point. Like, if they're not on board here, they're not on board by this point, they're not going to be. So I am now going to make that pay off. And he did. That was written for the people who had stuck with the show for 5 seasons. And you reach that point, that's when you get to, like, have fun with it and have it pay off. I call it having your dinner as a reference to that scene. That term is yet to catch on. One day it will. I've been using it for almost a decade now.
We'll have to start hashtagging it all the time on
having
Twitter
your dinner.
and stuff for
you. You leave it too late, it starts to feel padded. You leave it, you start too early, it doesn't feel earned. So that's how I feel about it. So that's just it. Like, at some point, you just have to say to yourself, either the audience is on board or they're not, and I just have to believe that they are.
Right. Oh, that's so brilliant. That is so good. That really, really helps me. It lends me closure in a sense too, because I feel like I've been missing a way of again articulating these thoughts to myself, where it's like I never. I wasn't, let's say, disinterested in what happened to Guybrush just because he couldn't die. I still very much cared when I eventually got around to playing that game, and so it's. And it's a way I should have worded it to you, but you took care of nicely without me, was using the term payoff, where it's like the stakes, usually, as I kind of alluded to earlier with Consequence, where it's like, you have those oh shit moments until it finally clicks, and then it's like, yes, I did it finally, and then you get the payoff. And
well, Guybrush is interesting, especially the first 2 Monkey Islands, and this is actually a theory, not really a theory, but like a Richard Cobbett wrote this wonderful article on his now defunct blog. It's somewhere on the web archive, but I remember it, where he talked about the comedy of Monkey Island and how, as ridiculous as it can get sometimes, the characters always take it deadly seriously. And so it's like, yeah, when Guybrush is in peril, yeah, we know he's going to be okay, but Guybrush doesn't. Like that last scene of Monkey Island 2, he's scared, in pain. He's really scared. And I think for all its sins, and a lot of people don't like the Telltale Monkey Island, I personally love it because it gave like real stakes. He goes through some dark stuff. It's still funny, but like he takes it deadly seriously, and like towards the end, he's like battered, beaten, and bruised, and struggling, and he can't even like muster up the energy to like make a joke. And it's like it's actually takes it so deadly seriously that even though it's comedy and there's no, he's not going to die, that kind of thing, or at least not die permanently, you still buy into it.
So you basically connected so many dots for me when you said the investment in the character, and that's exactly what it is. If you care enough about the character, then there is your stakes. You want to see them to the finish line safely, or you want to get them through their story. And so that is so good. That's really quite mind-blowing.
Sometimes it's really hard to have the distance yourself, to know that you've done your job of audience investment, of creating that investment, and at some point you just have to say, all right, I got to have faith at this point. And
all
then,
in.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard you say too, in previous interviews, that you really have to be emotionally invested in your own characters and your own.
I try to be.
You have to feel that connection, but at times you've had to work, or maybe it wasn't there right away, or maybe it's developed over time. Is that something
you figure it out? Always,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Also, just for myself, because games could take so long, especially now that I've done more of them, and they just take so long that when I start, I have to think, okay, is this something I feel good enough about that I can stay with it for several years? And sometimes the answer is like, I'm not sure if I like this enough to like have it stay in my head rent free for several years. Do I like this enough? Because inevitably you're always going to end up hating it. So you got to start from a position of really, really liking it, because whatever level, however much you like it, that level of liking it is going to go down. So you got to have a nice surplus of love for whatever you're doing, because by the time you're done, it's like that's going to be worn to a nub.
Well, is
no
there
matter
a
what.
difference? You've got love for the characters and love for the environment. I mean, you've made a few games that are kind of sharing the same universe. Is that kind of what happens? You're like, I really like this, but I want to move on to a different subset of characters, or maybe they're related in some not right away knowing way.
I think like I kind of like having the same universe. I mean, Blackwell and Unavowed, the connections are very, very are very blatant, because it's the same type of thing, because it's urban fantasy, so it was very easy to make those connections. Old Skies does take place in the same universe, and I like some of those characters. It's nice to be able to like make references to them, and it's also like it gives like a it's a cool thing for the longtime fans, and also it creates like a nice little shorthand. Like if I'm playing. If like, okay, I need a bank. So okay, I've mentioned the Grant City Trust in other games. I'll just use that again, and it gives it a kind of lived-in feeling. If you play the other games, it already has like it carries a little bit more emotional weight. Because like you've experienced that bank before, or if there's a reference, like I think when you go to the 1920s, there's this police officer whose name is Santina. Obviously, he's a ancestor of Vicky Santina from Unavowed, and he's barely there, but at the same time, just having to be a Santina like does carry a little bit of some. It does. It's an easy way of giving it a little bit more something, at least in my mind and my soul. I feel something more for the character because it has that connection, and I'm able to get that across a little bit more to the player, just because I'm feeling something. And I think being able to play in like this sort of world that I created, I have love of it, because I've lived there for so long that I can bring that across to the people playing it, even if they've never played the other games before. Like I still love it, like how I think the KK character from Unavowed, they don't even know that she was introduced in the Blackwell series, but they still love her. Like, yeah, there's something about her. I'm like, yeah, because I already had a very strong connection to that character even before I started writing her for Unavowed, because she was in Blackwell, and I already had all that in my head and in my heart and soul or whatever. And it was very esoteric. I get it, but at the same time, I think that's what helped me, make the character more than what it was, because of that connection in me.
Right, right. See, that's great. And I'm listening to you so much from a position of you could almost say like a apprentice, I guess you could say. Just trying
Don't
to
take everything I say as gospel. Like, everyone works differently. Everyone works differently. Like, this is just how I work and how it's worked for me.
Well, what's nice about it is a lot of it is really just affirmations of how I seem to be doing things as it is, which, again, it's like going off the field. But what I'm hearing from you right now is a lot of positive self-bias. Like a good way to tie that in would be like Mel Brooks. He's like, I don't write a line that doesn't make me laugh. And if it made me laugh, then it's good enough to go into my films or my scripts. So I'm working on a comedy myself. So that's, kind of basically where I'm at. It's like, if I laughed, then it's good enough. And let's just pray to God that people, agree with me to an extent, I guess, to So what you're basically just explaining there is like you can hear it coming through almost subconsciously, like from deeper within you, of like this just affection for your characters and for the world that you've created, and so it's like there's something to be said about just the level of care that you put into things, and the faith that the player will in some sense actually kind of notice that care and feel it themselves, and it's
I think I think
please.
often is like you can create like a immense backstory for your world and your characters. You don't need to use all of it. I think just knowing it's there, just having it in your head, and just like it'll come across one way or the other.
Yes.
I know there's like a lot of I think only video games get away with this crap. It's like you're playing like some epic RPG and you walk up to some random person and they'll like tell you their life story, or like the entire story of like their race or their people or where they came from or their home country. And it's like, I just met you, dude. Like, you don't have to, and none of it's relevant. And absolutely none of it's relevant. Like, you just like the fact that they're from this other culture is enough, like imbue them with a little bit of that. You knowing what all that stuff is enables you to make these characters feel more alive. And I think that people will sincerity can't be faked. If you're sincere, people will notice, and if you're not, people will also notice.
Right, like it's less about this like exposition dump of lore, like they just vomit lore all over you, and it's more just these subtle like, hey, I happen to need to mention a bank right now, and I already have a bank, and it's like it's maybe 24 tiny moments like that throughout a game can mean so much more than some big exposition.
It becomes its own lore in a way,
a little bit, yeah. And I think it was and I love Dragon Age Inquisition, but
that's what I was. Oh my gosh, I just had Dragon Age in my head. I'm like, I do not read all those bloody scrolls.
well, not even that. I just remember meeting Iron Bull for the first time, and I love Iron Bull, but he will like tell you the entire history of his people. He will talk about for 20 minutes to a half hour about the Kunari, their religion, who their leaders are, and you don't like meet another Kunari for like another 20 hours of game. And it's like, it just isn't relevant until like 20 hours later. And now I'm like, I was supposed to remember all that stuff. That's kind of what I'm talking about. It's just, and I love Dragon Age, and obviously
me too.
like,
it's amazing.
Maybe they're more popular than me, so maybe they know something I don't. But I just always found that like that kind of lore dumping, just especially for little games like mine. Like I can't do that, so I have to find other ways of doing something similar.
Right. Let me move us on to. I'm curious about interfaces, and specifically to discuss them with you, just because you've used. Quite a I think a variation of them. Let's say. I mean, I hesitate there for a second because I'm referring obviously to or including your published works as well. But I'm just curious what you feel about or how you feel about the different types of interfaces, because they're, I don't know, it seems like they they can either stand in between the player and having an adventure, or they can be like part of the toolkit that the player uses. And there's it's kind of also a bit of a argumentatively hot topic in a sense. People can get kind of vehement from one direction to the other. And yeah, just wondering, do you put much thought into it, or do you feel passionately about one or the other?
I mean, it's basically whatever works. I think like the more the less clunk between me and making things happen, the better. I think like with Unavowed, I did I did this thing where if you hover over something, it gives you see a text description pop up onto the screen like a tooltip. Because normally you would right click to, they would give a description and then left click would be interacting. And Francisco Gonzalez gave a wonderful talk at Adventure X last year where he talked about no one ever right clicks. And he's right. No one ever right clicks. With Unavowed, like you had the text description just appear on the screen. So it's like you can sort of scan with your mouse and get it all there. And also it saves on the voice acting, which is nice. But Unavowed, it worked because the main character wasn't voiced. He was they rather were silent most of the time. So that worked out. There was no other way to get descriptions because that worked pretty well. But I was debating forever whether I should do the same thing with Old Skies, because with that character is voiced and has her own like personality and ways of looking at things. So it would be nice to have those descriptions voiced. But then I did a count of all of her voiced lines in the game, and she already has like more lines than like some of my, like a chunk of like games put together. So like I don't think we'll be lacking for hearing Fia talking in Old Skies. So I decided to keep it because it's just I think it's just more efficient. I think whatever gets you, whatever just doesn't get in the way. I don't want to get in the way of the player doing stuff. So whatever makes it simpler or more elegant, I think works. There's no one size fits all for any game though.
Okay, and that was we did an episode on this recently. That was basically the conclusion at the end, is that there is no one size fits all, and it really has to be almost customized to the game itself and the level of exploration that the game's asking of the player and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. What about when it comes to like the games that you've published? I know like Jim and Iru, for example, has a pretty unique. It's almost like a mashup between like the Sierra icon bar and the verb coin in a sense, where it's like a tiny icon bar where a verb coin would be. And so when you publish games, like are you having the developers like Vince 12 for Resonance? Are you having them just come up with their own things, or?
Pretty much. I mean, if the interface didn't work and it wasn't fun, I might not have published it in the first place. I mean, with Resonance, I think in hindsight, replaying it now, it's maybe a bit over designed. Maybe like it's a little too clever in places. All the little windows and buttons that kind of swish around, and it's very slick. But I think we would have, if I was doing it again, I would make it faster, just more responsive, that kind of thing. Like the feeling is important. It's like you don't want it to get in the way. But with Gemini Rue, I think the interesting thing about it, I've noticed like games have verb coins, like I think Crystal Monkey Island had it, and Full Throttle had it, and they do this interesting thing that that never made any sense to me, which is where you have to hold down the mouse button for several seconds before it appears. And I was testing a game where they did that. I'm like, wow, like this makes no sense, because why don't you just click and then it appears?
Yeah.
And often than not, like they never even considered it, because this is just the way LucasArts did it back in the day. So I think it's because there's certain things on the screen you can just click once and it'll work, as opposed to but if you hold the mouse down, the verb coin appears. But I think that's just the way it was done. So a lot of they just never considered doing anything else. And the same thing with like the classic Sierra interface. I think no one gets it. No one gets that classic Sierra, multiple, icon interface. Like no one understands it. Right. It's clunky. I find it very ugly. And if you've never played those games or didn't grow up on them, you just don't understand them. They make no sense. So like I wouldn't use those. So just again, like whatever gets out of the player's way, just get out of their way. That's the best thing.
Right, that's interesting. Have you ever? So the position I'm in right now is, and this is, I'm just straight seeking advice from you at this point. I mean, it's all well, it's all too late as far as development's concerned. But what seemed to fit my game the best, and the one thing about the game that I'm developing is that it's what's the best way to put this? It's there's you don't walk along a y-axis. It's only on the x. You only go left or right, right? So it's extremely 2D, and so that seems to lend itself incredibly well to the keyboard. As far as just left and right arrow, you use a walking left, you're walking right. There's no
also can get ported to consoles a lot easier.
Oh, interesting. Okay, noted. Thank you.
Because you can just use the control stick left and right. Done.
Right, right. And a downside to the arrows might be, if you had to kind of, I'm thinking like the stairs in Sierra games, like any of that weird up left, and so I don't have any of that. So it really lends itself quite well to the arrows to the keyboard. And then the way I kind of designed it was 1, 2, 3 LIT, look, interact, touch. So you could do 1, 2, or 3 or LI or T, but kind of nudging the players in a brief tutorial in the beginning, like, hey, I know we don't get to ask them to remember much. We can ask them, to remember just a little bit. Like, here's how my game's played. Please remember, but you can't ask too much of them. So I tried to really reduce it down to just the pressing 1, 2, or 3 for look, interact, and touch. And I'm just wondering if you've been in a position before where there was maybe a few different ways of playing the game, and you wanted to nudge them into a certain direction, or
not really. I mean, I've asked I asked the Hobbs Barrow guys to add a map screen, like a fast travel.
Thank goodness, that was perfect.
But I mean, they actually did a really good job with that, because there's certain areas where it's like, you walk from, you do a scene, and then you walk if you walk 3 scenes away, like something happens. And so they had to disable the map screen for those moments, and they actually had to be very vigilant in figuring out what those were. So
right.
Sorry, guys. But they did a good job with that. Not often. I will, like, often by the time a game gets to that stage, all those, like, if I've been involved from early, though, that stuff has been ironed out, or by the time I see it and I like it, and I get involved, that's also been ironed out. Often that, like, if it's really bad, it'll come across in testing.
Right.
And usually, like, most of, at least the games I publish, they have pretty standard interfaces. They're like, I find that the less clever you are, the better.
Right.
Because, like, a lot of folks, they try to. I once worked talking to this developer. He had this crazy way of doing dialogue trees, and I just said, that just sounds like a very overly complicated way of just doing a regular, dialogue option screen. It just sounds like the exact same thing, just a lot more complicated. Right. And I don't know if he ended up making the game in the end, but I think he did agree with me in the end. It just it just got ridiculously. It was just insanely overly designed, and I'm not clever enough to over design stuff, which is why I keep it very simple.
So it's almost one of those. If you need a paragraph or 3 to describe it, then you might be in trouble. Like, it should probably be a sentence or 2. And I guess to bookend my starting point with that is, I think I just ultimately realized that all the modern adventure games, to a degree, have a very brief tutorial in the beginning. Like, hey, just in case you've never played an adventure game before, you point and then you click. And I think for me, it was one of those moments that almost ties into what you're saying, where I was like, I think I might be overthinking this. Like, if I tell them, use the arrows and here's your buttons for look, interact, and touch, like, people just tend to go along with it. Like, okay, this is what I do for this game. And so, it's a point of at the risk of over designing, when it's just like, hey, just walk away, just tell them what to do, and they'll probably do it.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to focus on story stuff for that exact reason. I've never been a gameplay guy. I've never been a design guy. I rely on Ben and whatever artist I'm working with to, like, design the UI, and it's typically just usually a version of the UIs that I've used since the first Blackwell game. Just the drop down inventory and some options if there's, like, something extra. I think, like, Blackwell had the notebook. Old Skies has but it's kind of like a web search. Not really a web search. It's like a it's basically like you can type in search terms and you can learn like what happens to these people in the future, and you use that information to solve puzzles and things like that. So that's part of the interface, but it's just a button. It's like nothing too clever.
Right. That brings me to actually a spontaneous question I wanted to ask you. Is I noticed a lot of your games, in a very positive sense, have really cool mechanics, like the short term, long term memory, or I don't remember what it was called in Techno Babylon, but I adored the
Oh yeah.
mixing.
We
Trance?
spent a lot of time talking about that.
Well, the trance as well, but specifically when you mix and mash like the goodness,
Robot.
The
yeah,
personalities?
thank you, personalities, yes.
Yeah. With the
and
little switches, I love that.
to this day, that
James is everyone remarks on that, like, because he originally did that with a freeware game and people loved it then. James was a genius. He comes up with the craziest stuff, and they're a lot of fun to play around with. He's very good at creating things that are both clever and fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's just plain fun, and it really took advantage of the world, of that cyberpunk world, where it's like it made me feel like a cyberpunk detective in the future with futuristic, but somehow realistic, like technology you could predict for, let's say, that made it really interesting. So I guess, but the question would be, do you? I don't want to say do you look for cool mechanics, because I would assume that's a bit rhetorical, but is it I don't know. I guess, is it something that you look for in games that you're wanting to publish, or is it
There's
just fun?
no rhyme or reason really. I mean, with Techno Babylon, he came to Adventure X once and showed it off, and I just instantly loved the look of it. I mean, the art style. I didn't realize it was Ben at the time, but I just instantly, I'm like, this looks amazing. Like, I must have it. And then he actually came. He wanted to talk to me about it anyway, and it turned out, oh, Ben's doing the art. Ben is already doing like 3 or 4 projects for me anyway. This is before I hired him full time. And I was thinking of doing that anyway, because like he was working on all of these projects that I was publishing anyway, and he was also had a full-time job like as a sheep wrangler. He was working on a sheep farm, and so
Right.
he would deal with sheep all day and then come home and do art. And I'm just like, you know what? It's probably like, why don't I, I'll take the risk salary, and then he can just do all this art full time. And that's what we did about a decade and change ago, and we haven't looked back since. It's just been wonderful ever since. He's just been amazing.
You guys are like the Slash and
but in terms
Axl
of
Rose of venture games.
something like that. But in terms of Techno Babylon and like why I take something, it's never usually due to a mechanic. Because with Techno Babylon, that mechanic was there, but it was very brief. It was only one scene. Usually it's just a vibe I get. I look at it, and like if it feels like something I want to play, it's hard to explain, because it's just a feeling of I like this, and that's
Yeah.
what all of the games we publish have in common. Is a lot of folks say, oh yeah, they all feel like they came from the same studio, and that's just because it's all stuff that I personally like,
Right.
and I could get behind it because I really like it. And like there was that one, of course, and Primordia and Strangeland and all the other games that we've done. Hobbs Barrow, when I played the demo, when it was called, I always butcher the original name. This is why we changed the name. Incantum,
Right.
I think it was
Incantum.
called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, you don't remember it either. Yeah. No, yeah, this is why we wanted to change the name. But I played the demo, and I was just thinking, like, this is so evocative. This is so evocative of that time and place, and I just really wanted to see more.
Yeah.
And the main thing I wondered was, I asked the designer, Sean. I wrote him and I said, like, are you going to add voice acting to this? Because it's screaming for it. Like
Right.
like this is something that needs voice acting. And he said, well, if we can find a publisher who will help us with that. And that was the reason why I took the game on, because for that reason, I wanted to. I know a lot of British voice actors that I've always wanted to work with, and
Cool.
I liked the game. It was just a vibe I got when I played it, and it's something very intangible. I can't explain it. It's just like, and also it has to hit me at the right time. maybe like I'm between projects, or I'm wrapping up a project, or I have the time or whatever,
Yeah.
or the developer has a track record, like they've already made several games, so I knew I wouldn't have to babysit them as much, that kind of thing. So there's no rhyme or reason why I will say, hey, let's work together, or I'd love to publish this or whatever. It's just, I don't know, the planets
Intuitive.
align in a certain way, and yeah.
Yeah, well, that's it's good enough on this show, let's say, because I think everything kind of comes down to a lot of things regard surrounding Anna and I. It's like we use by feel as like a definitive reason for a lot of things. Just by feel, on feel, and it is intangible, as you said. It's hard to exactly lay out what to put
Quantify.
words to the feeling, but it's certainly good enough of a reason. All right, let's see. So I wanted to. Anna's got some like kind of quick fire questions for you, but before we go there, I just wanted to kind of open up the mic as far as anything that you wanted to talk about with Old Skies, but also for Nighthawks. Something that hasn't been mentioned yet.
I'd like to hear.
I believe if that was kickstarted, I backed it originally, I believe.
Yes.
Sweet. Okay, so that was the one. And yeah, I don't hear much about. I mean, obviously, it's not. It's well, I shouldn't say obviously, but it's not an adventure game. It's more of an RPG. Is that correct in saying?
I mean, it
Vampire
is.
RPG.
It's very narrative heavy. A
Okay.
lot of it's. I guess it's more RPG-ish because it's got like combat and stats and stuff. So yes, but it's all text-based. So it's I guess so. I mean, it's an RPG in the way like Quest for Glory might be an RPG. Like it's there.
Right. Right.
The combat's kind of there, but it's not why you're playing it, kind of
Right.
thing.
Well put. And you're just publishing that?
Yes. Well, I say when you say I'm just publishing something, it's like me myself. I'm not heavily involved, but Wadjet is very involved because
Okay.
Ben Chandler has done all the art for it.
Oh.
So Dave Gilbert, me, I haven't done very much for it, but my company has. So yes, Wadjet has done quite a lot, but yeah.
Okay, and then to your lovely wife Janet, who has been a tremendous help to me without her ever having met or knowing me whatsoever, but just from her works on AGS have been very helpful to me. Like a lot of times, the solutions I find was like a thread that she started. Does she still work for you guys?
No. We when we had a child, we kind of needed a second income, so it's like the games do very well for one person. Like if for a one income, it's great. Like a one person income, it's wonderful. But it's we need to but I also like being like supporting a whole family off them is incredibly stressful because it comes, there's boom and busts all the time.
Right.
There are years that, maybe it takes a few extra years to get a game out. Maybe a game doesn't do very well, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, we've mostly been okay, but having, we need a bit more stability. So she got one of those real programming jobs. She works. She was doing work for they used to be a VR company, but now they've moved to just web-based stuff. But so she's doing work for them, and it's really amazing work, but it's not really video game stuff. But when she can, she helps out sometimes because she's much better at programming than I am. So if I'm having like a lot of trouble, like I can't get this algorithm to work, she sometimes helps me. But for the most part, she doesn't. She used to work full time doing Wadjet stuff, but not anymore.
Did you have programming experience before AGS, or did you just learn to do it for AGS?
Not really. I mean, I did some. But most of my programming comes from AGS. I used to do stuff in BASIC when I was a kid.
Right. Okay.
Like 10, go to 20, that kind of thing. Like it was, completely obsolete stuff. But I guess I could still think a bit like a programmer. I don't know. But mostly my programming knowledge comes from AGS, which is why when I tried to switch to Unity or try another system, it's just completely over my head.
Right. I remember in your origin story you had mentioned BASIC, and in that moment it was reminding me of the other Gilbert, because I think Ron had done BASIC, and then you went on to say that you played King's Quest, and that would be Ron's next step, and then Ron hated King's Quest, and you were like, he jumped, He jumped when I typed it. And that's where you guys diverged heavily.
Well, yeah, I was much younger when I played King's Quest. So. Although not by much.
Okay. Well, Anna, I've been talking so much. I'm so sorry. Do you want to hit him with some of the? She's got some really cool quick fire
Okay,
questions.
hit me.
Like
Go
she
ahead.
came up with so many good questions. I'm like, we better just do this as quick fire because I don't want to cut any of them. I like them a lot. So okay, sorry.
Oh, cool. So we'll go through all of them there. So yeah, you don't need to put too much thought into it. It's just kind of fun. But yeah, the first question is, if you could transport one of your game characters into the real world for one day, maybe even hang out with them, who would it be and why?
Oh, good God. Okay, that's an interesting question. I think Mandana from Unavowed would give some amazing tours of New York because she knows like what something used to be several hundred years ago. Like she was like, I remember when this mighty tree was a sapling, that kind of thing. Or like I remember when like there used to be like a bunch of fairies living in this pond or whatever. Like she's just give amazing tours. Of course, she could still, and she can't make anything up because she can't lie.
No. She's great. I love her voice actor. Who did that? Was that Sandra? It's Sandra, I think, did the
Sandra
voice.
Spinoza. Yeah, she's
Yeah.
she goes by Dusty Old Roses on the Twitter,
Yes.
and
She's
she's
very
amazing.
good. She
I
is
haven't
very good.
worked with her since, which I really. I know I have worked with her on Whispers of a Machine.
I was going to say, I think you
directed her.
did. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
right.
I can't wait. I need to work with her again because she's amazing.
I
She
didn't know. I
really
didn't know you
is.
were involved with Whispers. I thought that was like Raw Fury.
It was Clifftop being published by Raw Fury, and I did the voiceover casting and directing.
Oh, okay, that's right. You do pop up in all the voice acting stuff.
Everywhere.
There's very often Dave Gilbert in the scrolls, in the credits. I mean,
I did Kathy Rain and
Right.
Whispers.
Grocery
And
Joel or Yol.
yeah, that was
Oh,
a lot of
great.
fun because it was like I had all the great experience of working with the actors and directing them and enjoying that and not have to bother with any of like the editing afterwards.
Right.
So it's
It's almost like
always the tedious part.
it was like a grandkid instead of a kid. You know.
You could send them away when you're
Yeah.
done having your fun. It's like, all right, your mother's problem now. Go away.
Right.
Yeah.
Gosh, you must just have friends all over the world, don't you now? Just because
I
of voice
do.
acting and connecting with people. I mean, could you ever have imagined what your friend base would have looked like 20 or 30 years ago?
No. Well, what's amazing is that, I mean, I shouldn't say it's amazing because of COVID, but because of COVID, I used to be very precious about only working with actors in New York because I wanted everyone to be from the same microphone. I used to record out of my studio apartment before we had a kid and moved to a bigger place. And for some reason, there was something about the acoustics in my old apartment where everyone sounded great. But in this apartment, they always sounded terrible. It just was not that soundproofed here. And so everything just came into the microphone. So I found a studio in Midtown that I worked at. And I worked with mostly New York-based actors. But then COVID hit, lockdown happened. And I think for Strangeland, I had to, I'm like, well, I'll work with remote actors now. And I opened it up to basically the entire world. And I knew just from going to various events like Adventure X and Develop and things like that, I knew a lot of actors in the UK. And I got to work with them, especially on Hobbs Barrow. I got to work with all of my British voice actor friends, and it was such an amazing experience. And now I'm like working with voice actors from like Hawaii or Australia or Russia, Europe, as well as like my voice actor friends from 2 subway stops away. It's amazing. I do miss working with them face to face. I think I always will. There was something intangibly special about working with someone face to face.
Like a chemistry.
But
Really.
I can't deny that like it's just so much easier to work remotely. I don't have to like rent out the studio space. It's cheaper. I don't have to commute into the city every day. It's like I just roll up to my laptop and just record them, and it's great. And I get to work with people all over the world, and it's so great. Yeah.
Yeah, that does sound fantastic. Gosh, I just want to ask one last question connected
Ask
with that.
as much as you want.
Yay.
I've-
In Hobbs Barrow, what was it like? I mean, it all sounded really natural. Everything sounded
thank
great.
you.
But was it any different working with British cast compared to working with, say, Americans or anybody else?
Well, I'm in England a lot. My wife is British,
Yeah.
and
Right.
there's that. But also, I think like I find it's a big point of pride that actual Brits that everyone sounded authentic, because it wasn't just everyone had to be British; it was that they were all from Yorkshire. And
Right.
so, and I am kind of familiar with the Yorkshire accent. That's where where Janet lived when we were dating. So I want to say I'm familiar with the Yorkshire accent, but the really thick Yorkshire accent, I couldn't understand. So sometimes I'd get auditions and I would ask, I'm like, is this a really good accent or just a really bad one? Because I can't understand a word they're saying. But fortunately, the game was actually written by Brits. And I figured, well, I like the way they sound. And I think I have a good instinct for how good someone sounds, and like just in terms of there's some kind of like I look for like authenticity. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. A lot of it is just gut feeling and vibes. But when I got someone I liked, I would make a point of sending it to the developers and say, "Does this sound authentic to you?" And if they said yes, I'm like, okay, it's fine, because I figure if they could. Pass if your accent is good enough to fool a pair of Brits, then I figure you're fine.
Yeah.
And off the time, like, I also have to, since it's not just you want a British accent, but British accent specifically that's like in England
Regional.
for British people.
Yeah.
It's very regional, and so when I'm working with the actors and like something that I might have thought was a typo or something. Or they add a little colloquialism or something. I'm not like I thought that just sounds weird to my American ears. I will just have to trust them, and because like they would know more than me. I think there was this one where the bartender said like 2 pound or something like that. It'll be 2 pound something, and I'm like, would you say pound or pounds?
Right.
And it's for some reason. Because in the script it said pounds, but just instinctually the actor said pound, because that's how he felt it should sound. And he was also from the north. And I'm like, well, in that kind of situation, I'll do it both ways and then run it past the developer and see what they say. And often that's the case with any game, not just British stuff, but like with Whispers of a Machine, for example. I think when an actor does a role for long, I warn you, you get me started on voice acting, I won't stop. When an actor's done a role for a long time, especially when Ivy Dupler did Vera in Whispers, they'll often get a feel for it. They have a unique connection to the character that even the writer doesn't have.
Right.
And sometimes like there'll be a word or a line that's phrased in a slightly weird way, and it'll just feel weird in their mouth. And they'll like Ivy once, I think it was I forget what the line was. But it was something about, I think it was blue stuff. There's blue stuff on the floor. And then she said the line, and we both looked at each other. And she's like, yeah, you hear it too. It sounds weird, right? Because she's this very, like, official, by-the-book cop. And the word stuff sounded weird. So we changed it to something else. But we weren't sure if it was done that way for a reason. So we record it as written. And then we do the alternate version and just see what they say, just in case. But that's what I always do. I always listen to those instincts, because that is a reason. That's one thing an actor brings to the table, is that they've worked very hard to like make things sound natural and give a character certain traits and quirks that make the character who they are. And after a while, that becomes second nature. And if you don't listen to them when they feel that something's wrong, then you're not using half of the reason why you want to use a real flesh and blood actor to start with. And you can tell I'm not a big fan of AI for that reason.
Right. That's so interesting. So the voice actor basically forms like a somewhat or an intimate relationship with the character, and to the point where they can almost instinctively draw from the character itself and be like, she'd probably say this, like almost more feeling. Interesting.
Especially with a character that is recurring, or if it's a player character or a main character or someone that comes back after several games. Like by the last Blackwell game, Abe Goldfarb, like he would look at me sometimes and be like, this doesn't sound very Joey. Could I maybe change this word or say it this way or whatever? And I would usually say yes, unless there was a specific reason why it had to be that way.
Right.
Because, listen to them. Listen to them. That's like why they're there.
Right.
I wanted to ask you too. You seem because I think one of the I don't know. I've been trying to frame this to myself even the last 2 days, and I eventually decided on scrapping it as a question for you. But here we are, to my surprise as well.
Ask away. No stupid questions, just stupid answers.
Right. I feel like I'm bad at almost framing questions. I think I more just say stuff at you and then I'm like respond. But you seem to have like quite a natural talent for direction. There's something about the Blackwell series that I don't, it just feels very well directed, and so I'm wondering if that's I know this is a really, again, this is a poor way to frame a question to you, because I'm almost asking you to pat yourself on the back, which isn't fair, because I would hate that if someone did it to me. But again, here we are. But I guess here's a way to frame it. Could you see yourself I don't know, in a different timeline, like directing films, or do you have a particular interest in direction itself?
Well, I went to school I studied broadcasting in college, and I did some directing, but I found like the chaos of like like telling the cameras where to go and, all that stuff was so crazy for me. But when I would like sit down with an actor one-on-one, I really enjoyed it. And but it wasn't really something I thought of doing. I think that, like I said, when I first did the Shiva, 17 years ago, I wanted to give it value, and I thought, okay, I'll add voice acting. And I was in an improv group at the time, and I asked them if they would help me out with like, would you be in this game? I'll buy you pizza afterward, whatever. And they said yes. And one of the actresses, her name is Ruth Weber. She played Rodshri in the game. She actually did some voice acting, like professional voice acting. She did cartoons and stuff, and she would ask me questions. I don't remember exactly what they were, but she would ask me certain questions about the character and like how, just certain things that I never really thought about. I just made me realize that there was a lot more to the discipline of voice acting than I had realized, and I was kind of fascinated by it. And she would tell me these things that she would do to like give herself energy, like how she would try to connect to the character, how she would sit and stuff like that. It's like, and I found that just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And then the more I did it, the more I just became interested in like how these actors managed to do it. Because what I love about voiceover, love about video game voiceover specifically, is that unlike a lot of cartoons or and the commercial voiceover and things like that, video game voiceover is probably the most grounded voiceover you'll hear, because a lot of it, you don't get a lot of cartoony, over the top characters in video games. They're mostly very, very grounded. And so it's important that the characters sound realistic and grounded, and you have to believe, and I find that, and getting to that point, seeing an actor get to that point is, I find it amazing to watch. And I think that the actors that I've kind of found myself gravitating towards are the ones who can kind of reach those points very quickly and very instinctually.
Right.
Rather, they have to like feel things very intensely and get to that point very quickly, which is why a lot of voice actors who've been doing it for a long time are the craziest people you'll ever meet, because they feel everything very, very intensely, and they have to like whip these emotions out within a second notice. Like if you have someone working on like a big epic RPG, and if someone like Jennifer Hale is doing Commander Shepard, I can say this because I went to a talk by her and she talked about this, where you have scripts that are like, the size of skyscrapers, and you can't give context for every single line. It's more like you're angry here, you're upset here, you're jealous. And so she knows it's not about believing or knowing exactly the context of what the character is going through. but what it's like, how do you feel that and make it like, it's not enough that the audience believes that Jennifer Hale is on a spaceship and like horrible things are happening and she's angry. They just have to believe she's angry. And if she can connect to that, and like, because a lot of the time it's you're angry, but you're trying to like hide it.
Right.
So it's like as long as you got to be feeling it very intently, and as long as when you can reach that point, it's like you can do some amazing things. And I'm going off because I can talk about this forever, and I find that just fascinating when like an actor does that, and I just blows my mind because I can't do that myself. That's just not something I can do. Right. But I love working with the actors who can, and it's just amazing to watch. And I find the whole discipline fascinating.
So it's like you created a character that has some of you in it, and now you're sharing that character with somebody else, and they're becoming a part of that character. Like that's really quite heavy.
It's really kind of magic. I can't quite explain it. It's for me anyway. That's why I love it so much, and why I talk about it so much, and probably that comes across in the voice acting in the games that I release, because I just I love working with the actors, and I think they feel that, and I think by making it fun and making it also comfortable, making sure they're taken care of and everything, all that's important too.
Right. You put something in such an interesting way that really it makes your fascination a bit contagious, because it helps me understand. It helps me understand how you see it. Where you worded it like, and I guess I want to bounce this off you to make sure I'm understanding it correctly. But it just clicked at once when you said it, where it's like they have to believe it so intensely and authentically. It's almost, I guess, I want to make sure I understand it correctly, that if they can feel it intensely and authentically, only then can they bring it back down to a subtle level if needed.
Like, because it has to be genuine. Exactly.
Right. Okay. See, that is extremely interesting, because as you said, people aren't, maybe they're not like dialed up to 11 in anger all the time. But if you can channel that, then you can bring it back down, and control these subtle levels of emotion. That's really interesting.
When I was working with Abe Goldfarb on Strangeland, like he was connecting to something dark, and like, he's like one of my oldest friends, and I'm like, I'm feeling like I'm hurting my friend, because I'm not going to ask him what he's thinking about, but it's like, I believed he was hurting, he connected to something that brought him to where he needed to be. Wow. And he said, that's the great thing about, like, as an actor, it's good to be able to use those feelings. That's one reason. That's what draws me to being an actor, and I just love that.
Cool.
I just love that.
That is it validates, past traumas in a sense, because you can use it for something positive.
I'm sure you'd much rather not have trauma, but at the same time,
right? But we're all going to in an existential manner, so you might as well use it positively.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
well,
I find that magical.
I really do. I'm fascinated by the whole aspect. Paul and I played around with our first little mini stint in voice acting for a 2-hour-long video on Conquests of the Longbow that was done by One Short Eye, and I got to play Maid Marian, and Paul was Will, and it's not really something other than narrating to play through a game for beta testing. It's not something I'd ever really done before. It's an experience, even on a small scale like that.
I've done some voice acting myself, though. I don't know if it counts when, like, I'm casting the game and I cast myself. I gave myself I technically gave myself the player character in Unavowed, but like, there's a male and female version of that character, and there's like a very complicated backstory. And when I was working with Shelley on the female version, half the session was just me explaining to her what the hell was going on. And because like there's so much subtext that goes into like everything. And I think for the next one, I'm like, well, maybe I could just save some time and money and do it myself in between sessions. If a session ends early, I'll just hop into the booth and record, because I was in the studio. So I just did it myself because it was easier and cheaper and quicker. And I did okay.
It sounded great.
Did you pop up in, I feel like you had a cameo maybe in A Golden Wake or Lamplight?
Not in Lamplight. I think I was in Golden Wake. It's been so long. I think it was a train conductor. I'm not sure. It's been so long. I was in Whispers. I forget as who. I think I was someone on a tape recorder. I know I was in Kathy Rain. I think I was like a drunk barfly. But again, I casted all of those games, so I gave it's like a little dinky. Usually, I would give myself some dinky little role that is like, oh, I forgot to cast this one. He's got 3 lines. I'll just do it myself.
Right. It reminds me of Tarantino in a sense, just kind of just to slip in there, just
I think
to be in the film.
In Gemini Rue, I'm like an assorted bunch of like New York style thugs, where the idea of like the idea of the game's publisher shooting the player in the face, I find kind of funny.
It's awesome.
I like that behind the scenes information. Now, speaking of, you were mentioning that you weren't really into directing. There's so many sides of it. So like, let's take that a step further and say
actual recording on a set. Like an actual, like a live, like the camera's going and the actors are moving around, and I gotta remember where all the cameras are, who's pointing at what.
Much.
Okay, camera 2, point at this. Okay, cut to 2. It was way too much.
So if one of your games was adapted into a movie or TV series, do you have an idea of who you might like to direct it, or even which actors you would envision playing any of the characters?
I hate this question. I have no idea. Because it's like, oh, who would you want to play Rosa and Joey? I'm like, I don't know. I can only envision Abe and Rebecca. So let's make it animated so I can use them. I don't know.
Actually, I like that.
Yeah.
Would you? I mean, that's another side. Maybe you take it in an animated direction.
I totally would. If I'm always willing, just so everyone knows, I am totally willing to sell out if there is anyone willing to buy in. I will buy. I will sell out in a heartbeat. Like if anyone is willing to like pay for it, no problem.
You heard it here. Email us, mail@theclassicgamersguild.com. We'll hook you up.
No problem. I'll only like certain IPs were sold for $1 billion. I'll only take half that. No problem.
Easy.
Easy.
You're talking real world numbers here. All right. Well, how about this? In an alternative universe, and you're you've explored, you've played around in other genres a little bit, but let's imagine that, say, you were to completely make a game in an entirely different genre that had nothing to do with adventure games, RPG, story. Is there another game that you would, like an action game, something like Frogger? Is there anything you're interested in otherwise?
I mean, I love I guess it's more of an artist thing, but there was a brief resurgence in what they call cinematic platformers, like Out of This World or things like that. There's one, and I'm forgetting the name of it, and it's driving me crazy. It's so beautiful. It's about like a little boy running around a city that has monsters in it. But it's just or it just really tells the story through just visuals and very minimal action as opposed to dialogue and things like that. That seems more up my alley, except I'm not an artist, so I probably wouldn't be the one to make that. I don't know, because I'm not a gameplay guy and I'm not an artist, and so all I have left is really the narrative and the programming if it was AGS. I guess being a project manager, but I don't know. Let's just hope I never have to answer that, figure that question out.
Not in real life. Well, perfect. Well, the last question I have for you, and this is one I'm kind of curious about, and I mean, you don't even necessarily need to tell me but is there any Easter eggs in any of your games that nobody has discovered yet? Something hidden somewhere that only you or a programmer knows is there? Or is it kind of already, it's out there, it's in the walkthroughs, it's in the videos, people have talked about everything?
There's this one stupid joke that I thought that everyone would hate me for, but no one has gotten the reference. There's this one really, you could tell I had a young child at the time. I mean, she's still young, but she was younger then, where I think in Unavowed, there's a guy named Diego. And and Vicky says to him, it's like, yes. She says, how's your cousin doing? And he says, oh, she's always traveling. And because she was always watching Dora the Explorer.
No swiping.
And no one got that joke. I thought for sure everyone would hate me for that joke. No one, or at least if they got it, they never like they never said anything. I'm like, I made a freaking Dora the Explorer joke in Unavowed.
You're gonna let me get away with this?
Yeah, so that's one of them. I think people always wonder, like, oh, what happened to Joey? And there's this one, I didn't even notice this myself. Ben threw it in. It was in the subway in Unavowed. There's a sign that says there's only one mall, and underneath it says eJoy, and you see like there's a picture of a guy wearing a tie, but it's very small, so it's hard to tell what it is. But it's like, one mall. You flip that around, you have Malone, and eJoy. You flip that around, you have Joey.
Joey.
So you have Joey Malone, and like I didn't even get that joke until Ben told me about it. I didn't even notice it. So I that's another one that I found funny. And there's plenty in Old Skies as well.
I love that so much more for you not getting it.
No, Ben throws all sorts of weird Easter eggs into the art. Like if there's graffiti, every single bit of graffiti means something. If it's like some weird like set of words or phrases or numbers, it means something.
Love that.
Because he always figures graffiti always means something to somebody.
Right.
So he makes a point of making sure it means something to him.
Oh, I relate to that. I can't put numbers in the game at all without it being something. I'm like, well, I mean, might as well be somebody's birthday. We're here.
And I think in a lot of the games, like there's always a reference to apartment 4E. If you ever go to an apartment number, it's usually 4E. That's because I used to live in an apartment 4E, and that's
cool.
the first one that always comes to my brain.
Was that the one with the good sound, the good acoustics?
Was. and if anyone figures, I no longer live there, so I don't care if anyone figures that out.
Go knock on the door. It's fine. See who lives there now.
You don't know.
I mean,
you don't know what building it's in. Although, like, if you look at a lot of the locations in the Blackwell games, they all are like around 5 minutes from where I used to live. So I imagine if you like did like a radius, you could figure out roughly where my building was. It's all within 5 minutes of where I used to live. So.
The committed stalker could work it out.
Yes, the committed stalker.
All right, I got one last one for you before we start to wrap up. I'm just wondering, what would you suggest? And this is not so subtly trying to sell a game or two for you too. But what would you recommend to a new adventure gamer, and conversely to a seasoned adventure gamer as far as your catalog's concerned? So what Wadjet game would you say, hey, if you're kind of new adventure, play this one, and if you're seasoned, play this one?
I mean, it's not like my games are particularly challenging. So, excuse me. Although I would say if you're a more seasoned one, the ones that have the more difficult puzzles would probably be Resonance and Primordia. Those are the ones that folks generally say are the more challenging. But I'd say if you're new, I mean, most of them are pretty user-friendly. Unavowed seems to be popular. So I'm really terrible at judging this kind of thing. But yeah, none of my games are particularly challenging, the ones that I've written. And I'd say Unavowed is probably one of the more accessible ones, so go with that one.
Okay, now I thought of a more fun question. Sorry, real quick.
All right.
What of your own games? I won't do published games because that risks you having to like name a favorite child. So we'll forget the published ones because they're by different wonderful developers. And for the record, Resonance and Golden Wake are two of my all-time favorite games.
Cool.
I would probably. Yeah. Okay. No, this isn't a me ranking thing. Sorry. What is your favorite game of your own game? Whether it's one specific Blackwells, etc.
Well, that's funny because like I think about the games that I had the most fun working on, the games that I have most fun playing later, or like the games I'm most proud of. Like I like different ones for different reasons, but if I could think of like three for different reasons. Blackwell Unbound, I had the most fun working on because it was like I needed to get it out quickly. I was running out of money, and I just sort of threw it together and kind of whatever I thought would work, I threw it in. Like I wasn't really thinking too deeply about will this sell. I didn't have like a lot of experience to draw from, so I wasn't second guessing myself constantly. And I just it was just this wild, intense, creative few months.
Cool.
And so I think I had the most fun working on that one. So I remember it really fondly. Blackwell Epiphany is the game that that was the game I always envisioned making.
Cool.
And I finally had like the the clout and experience to pull it off. And I still look at that game and I'm like, yeah, this is it. Like this is it. But Unavowed, I still enjoy the crap out of playing.
It's so good.
Like I still play it, and I put different character combinations together, and they say something. I'm like, oh yeah, that was cool. Like because there's so much in there that I've forgotten a chunk of it. So I still find it a lot of fun. So those are 3.
Just to make you uncomfortable to praise, I'll just say Unavowed, I played for 3 days straight and did nothing else. No personal hygiene, none of that.
You're welcome. Just paying the favor forward, because there were plenty of games back in the day where I did the same. So,
I played that game in a rush I wanted to play it before a walkthrough came out. I did the same thing with Thimbleweed, but I was like, I'm going to play Unavowed before there's even a walkthrough. And who knows? Maybe there was one. I mean, I don't even know. But I didn't let myself Google it, and I assumed.
Like I said, it's not the puzzles are never challenging. I think there's one that a lot of people get stuck on, and that's only because I didn't signpost it well enough. It was the door the roof door key code. I think that was in Wall Street. I think that was the one that a lot of people got stuck on. But that was my fault for being a bad designer.
That's harsh. That's harsh on yourself. No, Anyway, I adored lunchbox, please. I'm talking to Dave Gilbert here. Okay, that's all I got. Anna, what do you say?
I just want to say thank you for the entertainment. I mean, it's not so. I mean, you can make a movie and you entertain me for 2 hours, right? You write books and you can. But this is something else, because I've been involved in your world and your game, and I feel like I know you like not. How do I put it? It's like, I've said it to Paul before, seeing somebody's game is like seeing into their brain just a little bit, kind of how they think and how things work. And it gives me that connection. And also having met you in person before, it's just, you've been a huge part of my life for such a long time. And before
I'm suddenly remembering, was it you who asked me for advice about a game design they were working on? Or am I thinking of somebody else?
I don't know. So many I wasn't working on a game at the time.
Okay, that must have been someone else I'm thinking of. I'm sorry.
I did write you when I first started making my game, because there's a ghost in it.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, you did a game with a ghost. You mind if I do one too? And you're like, I don't own adventure games with ghosts.
I do not. Not even adventure games with blue ghosts, because there's that just came out. The Will of Arthur Flabbington just came out. And that one has a blue ghost. And Thimbleweed Park, you have nerdy redhead girl and blue ghost who blows on things.
Right. Oh yeah.
Fine.
So yeah, thank you. It's great in this world how we can all affect each other's everyday life, all because, and I mean, a lot of the reason for all of us is because we booted up a computer and put something in it, some kind of a game, something that took our imagination off in a direction that we didn't expect. And that's just so amazing to me, sitting here right now in 2024, for goodness sakes, seeing how much that has affected all of our lives.
Oh, that is a wonderful sentiment. I love that.
Well, thank you.
I don't want to say anything to ruin it.
Well, how about we say thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for you, the listener, for listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
This was a ton of fun. Thank you.
Oh. I appreciate it.
I was out of practice. I haven't been interviewed in a while, so it's like, wow, I can still talk. Wonderful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we can do our finishy up little Patreon talk and everything after. So
the finishy up, I love that.
The finishy-uppy things. It's
the finishy-uppy things. That's the technical. That's the industry technical term for it. The finishy-up bit.
It is. So yeah, I don't know if you have to go. I heard you were being called from the other room, and that's okay now. We've got everything we want on there, but. I'm really glad you came on the show. We've been wanting to talk to you for ages, and Paul's been saying, Anna, you got to complete, because I want to play all your games before we talked, and I was like, okay, I had the last few, as I mentioned in the chat, I hadn't done Shiva yet, and a few other ones, and then you wrote it at such a beautiful time, and we're finally getting organized enough to do calendars, because we can only do so many interviews in a year. We're only a bi-weekly podcast, and we're not an interview focused podcast. So we
Well,
put
I
a lot of
listened
time,
to
energy, and respect into this.
I kind of scanned through your archive, I guess it's called, and I saw you talk to Ivy
Love
and just some
Ivy.
people I've worked with, and I'm like, oh, like that. And we had talked, like, you did that interview like a few years ago, so it was
Oh,
like
yeah.
we had just, I don't know if we had just done Whispers or something
think
like that.
so.
It was really
It
right
was
around that time, yeah.
yeah, I think it might have even been before lockdown or something crazy.
Right.
And so I was like, oh wow, maybe I should talk to these guys, and lo and behold, there we go.
No, when you had mentioned, I think you had reached out on Twitter or something, but you're just like, how did I just discovered your show. I don't know how I didn't see it. I went through the back. Like, that's still making my
Yeah.
day.
We've been telling everybody about this. We're like, and he messaged us.
Oh please, it's like you've met me. It's like,
No, but
I'm not that impressive when you meet me.
untrue. Just the
Thank
best
you.
conversations and flow. Because Paul's like, I've never really met him. How is it going to go? I hear him on interviews, and I'm like, it's a flow, and we have so much in common in so many different ways. So it was exactly that. So thank you.
Well, you were right. I actually do have a thing. It's just
Yes,
we
that's
are yeah. I do need to jam, but this was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
David. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and good luck with Old Skies. And we'll be harassing you on various socials and stuff.
Feel free. I'm very harassable.
All right, guys, we are all done. That's the show. Thank you so much for listening. It's bloody. It's just me, by the way. Everybody's gone. They all went home. Anna's probably off doing something just on the nose Canadian. Because I was on video call with her yesterday with some of the Hotspot Network friends, and in the middle of it, Anna just takes a sip of water, but it's from one of those giant Gatorade bottles that hockey players use. It's just great. Makes the world feel small and safe when you see that kind of goodness. Sorry. Let me regroup. Okay, so we're all done. Thank you guys for listening. We have some news. We as in, just me and the spirit of other people have news for you, which is the Adventure Game Fanfare is going off this summer, very end of July, in Tacoma, Washington. You guys got to come. You got to do it because I'm going to be there. Actually, I think Dave Gilbert is going to be there. I believe Francisco Gonzalez. There's going to be a Sierra Online alumni reunion. You got your bloody Ken and Roberta Williams. You got your Al Lowe, Lori and Corey Cole. A bunch of people from LucasArts side are going to be there as well. I know David Fox is going to be there. I think Ron Gilbert. There's going to be more Gilbert than you could bloody wrap your something around. So, check. I'll put a link in the description below. So you can get some more information on it. But the Adventure Game Fanfare by Adventure Game Hotspot, it's going off in Tacoma, Washington this summer. Everybody in the Hotspot Network is going to be there. You can come meet Anna and I and Trolls and Venture Game Geek and Daniel and One Short Eye. It's gonna be a great time. So buddy, get your tickets or whatever. Okay, listen, let's be done here. We're on Twitter at CGG Podcast, at Phantom Fellows. Wishlist Phantom Fellows on Steam. That's my baby. I'm almost done. I'm working on the credits. That's how almost done we are. We're going to be moving into playtesting while I work on the soundtrack and musical score at the same time. And so things are going awesome there. If you don't mind wishlisting it, if you've already wishlisted it, vote for it to be put on GOG. If you've already done that, then just sit tight. Just feel good. Be like, man, I'm a good ass friend. I listen to his bullshit show. I wish his bullshit game. Okay. Sorry. What else do I have to tell you guys? We're a page in a group on Facebook. Join us at the Classic Gamers Guild. Not podcast, just the Classic Gamers Guild, period. You could email us, mail at classicgamersguild.com. You could become a Patreon, patreon.com/classicgamersguild, or just go to Patreon and search us like most people would. But also, thank you so much to our Patreons. I love you guys. For real. We got some new Patreons, Jess and Alani. Thank you so much. There's a Patreon exclusive episode up where Anna talked to Alani about some more hidden gems. And thank you to everybody in our extra special thanks tier. Tim Ellis, Michael Council, Brian Manown. Love you guys. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate you guys. And I think that's it. I think the greatest gift I can leave you now is to let you go. But come back. I didn't like the way that felt when I said that. It was scary. Please come back. We'll be back in the usual. We'll be back in a week or two. Well, definitely two, but I hope you have a good January. This month is kind of a bummer, right? It's like just still trying to get all that serotonin or dopamine back from spending it all on Christmas. Feel like SpongeBob when he's left out in the sun for too long. That's the representation, visually speaking, of my brain right now. All right, get out of here, you scallywags, you rapscallions, you. Why am I doing this? We already have an outro thing to say. That's why there is a thing that we say at the end, because you don't know what else to say. So you're just like, I'm just gonna say that thing that I always say, and I get to be done. So bloody don't do a murder. Going to run you through a really quick spiel. One, if there's anything you want cut or taken out, feel free to tell me. We're going to be editing it anyway. So if you're like, whoops, that sounded racist, just let me know and I'll cut it out.
I will do my best not to put you in that position.